Good evening. I'm Bill Bryant of WKYT TV. Welcome to Eastern Kentucky University and the EKU Center for the Arts. And we also welcome our listeners on WEKU FM radio, Kentucky.com, and also WKYT.com. A week from tomorrow, Central Kentucky voters decide who will represent them in Congress for the next 2 years. Kentucky's 6th District is made up of 19 counties, including the cities of Lexington, Richmond, Frankfort, and Georgetown. There are more than 730,000 people who live in the 6th District. We welcome the candidates this evening, and here they are. On the left is current Representative Andy Barr, who is in his first term in Congress. The Lexington native worked as an attorney before being elected to office. And on the right is Democrat, the challenger, Elizabeth Jensen. She is a former executive with Disney Consumer Products, and she currently runs an educational nonprofit organization in Lexington, which she founded. We'll have a hand for the candidates as we welcome them. EKU, the Lexington Herald Leader, and WEKU Radio joining WKYT in planning and bringing you tonight's debate. Joining me in questioning the candidates are political writer Sam Youngman of the Herald Leader, Jonice Franklin, who is news director at WEKU Radio, and Kyle Nicholas, who is the president of the EKU Student Government Association. Also like to notice that we are joined on stage by some select students from EKU who are here for a lesson in democracy tonight. So we appreciate them being here very much as well. Just a few minutes ago and before tonight's debate, the candidates drew numbers to decide the order of introducing themselves, and they will have 90 seconds each to do that. And we begin with candidate Andy Barr.
Well, thank you, Bill, and thanks to WKYT and especially Eastern Kentucky University and this beautiful facility on EKU's campus, the Center for the Arts, where we had an opportunity to be with you all on Saturday for the inauguration of Dr. Mike Benson as the new president of EKU. And we want to thank EKU for hosting this very important discussion about the future of our country. I've been your congressman now for about 22 months. And I ran for Congress for a cause, not a career. And that cause was to save America from bankruptcy, to hold Washington accountable, and to restore the American dream. Carol and I are raising our daughters to believe that in this country, if you work hard and play by the rules, you cannot just get by, you can get ahead. That is the American dream, and the call to leave this nation better than the one we received. Unfortunately, let's face it, for many Americans in this country, that dream is slipping away. Why is it slipping away? Because of failed policies coming out of Washington, because of unaccountable government. It seems like these days government can't get anything right, whether it's the IRS or the Veterans Administration. A $2 billion website that doesn't work to facilitate a law that the American people don't like, the Secret Service, even the CDC can't get Ebola right, and no one thinks that our foreign policy has made us stronger or more secure. It doesn't have to be this way. You deserve better. I've been working in a bipartisan way in Washington to deliver solutions because I believe Americans deserve a government that spends less, serves better, and is genuinely accountable to American taxpayers. And I look forward to having a robust discussion tonight about the future of our country and the solutions we're working on for the people of Central and Eastern Kentucky.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. And now our opening statement will come from candidate Elizabeth Jensen.
I'm Elizabeth Jensen. I'm a businesswoman with a proven track record of getting things done and a Kentucky mom. I'm running for Congress because I believe we need something different in Washington. Time is limited tonight, so I'm going to use my opening statement to get right down to business. My opponent doesn't like to be held accountable for his views on issues or for his votes. He's going to tell you about a lot of legislation he's introduced to try and fix Washington, which, according to the Herald Leader, has little to no chance of ever being enacted. I'm for raising the minimum wage and giving hardworking Kentucky families a raise. My opponent is not. I support the Paycheck Fairness Act. My opponent does not. I will fight to protect your Social Security, Medicare, and SNAP nutrition benefits. Andy Barr supported a budget that would raise costs for Medicare for most Kentucky seniors and end the Medicare guarantee. He's voted over and over to cut SNAP nutrition benefits that hurt families that could afford it the least, including 170,000 veterans. When it comes to banking, I will always be on the side of consumers that need credit with simplified terms and affordable interest rates. His biggest accomplishment is legislation that would take us back to the deregulation of banks that crippled our economy in 2008 and cost our Kentucky families their homes and life savings. I am committed to helping the hardworking families throughout our district by creating more, better-paying Kentucky jobs and providing education and the skills to get those jobs, and to make sure we have a world-class infrastructure to attract new businesses.
Ms. Jensen, thank you. And now our agreed-to format this evening is that I, along with the panelists, will be asking questions. There will be a 1-minute response from the first candidate and a rebuttal of 30 seconds to each answer, also given by one candidate, and the other will respond if there's something that needs to be said. We begin with Sam Youngman from the Herald-Leader, who has the first question of the evening, and he will direct that to Elizabeth Jensen.
Thank you both for being here. As I'm sure you both know, there was another tragic school shooting last week, this time in Washington State. What, if anything, do you think Congress should do to try and prevent gun violence in our schools?
Throughout our district, throughout our district and most of Kentucky, our citizens are sportsmen, and they enjoy their Second Amendment rights, and I'm fully supportive of that. But I believe it's very important that we also focus on mental illness and the issues that affect our youth. We need to find a way to make sure that we are protecting our young people, but still allowing our citizens to have the opportunity to bear arms.
Mr. Barr.
Well, gun violence is a problem in our society, particularly with respect to these school tragedies. As a father of 2 young daughters, it worries me very much about school security and school safety. And so certainly we need to focus on school safety and school security. I do not believe that disarming law-abiding citizens and violating basic constitutional rights is a solution, let alone constitutional. I am endorsed by the National Rifle Association, and I'm a strong advocate of sportsmen in this district, a member of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus. The solution to this problem in this country, violence, and particularly school security, is legislation that I have been working on with Congressman Tim Murphy in Pennsylvania, the Help Families in Mental Health Crisis Act. Our mental health system in this country is clearly unprepared and not competent sufficiently to deal with this problem. Identifying people with mental health needs, intervening on their behalf, resourcing our agencies properly. And so this legislation would totally reorient an unaccountable bureaucracy in Washington to a better system that actually identifies and intervenes on behalf of families who have mentally ill loved ones.
Ms. Jensen, do you desire a response?
As the parent of a child with an intellectual disability, I am concerned every day about all of the families who have to balance the rights of their children, but also the needs of the community. And I believe that also thanks to Kentucky Connect, we have opportunities for mental health care and mental health parity through the Affordable Care Act, which is something that are going to be beneficial to solving and addressing these issues in our community.
Well, I think clearly we do need reform in mental health. The problem is when you need to intervene on behalf of someone who has a mental illness, you don't need a delay. And access to a waiting line is not access to health care. That's Obamacare. Obamacare is not the solution. Of course we need more coverage. Of course we need more access to health care services. What we don't need is a VA-style health care rationing solution from Washington. What we need are real solutions, getting patients and families in touch with psychiatrists and psychologists on a timely basis.
Our next question will come from Jonice Franklin with WKYT Radio, and she will direct that question first to Mr. Barr.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here. Congressman, should Kentucky raise the minimum wage?
Well, no. I oppose raising the minimum wage. I support raising wages. And a better way to raise wages is through economic growth. It's interesting that those who support raising costs on hiring are the same people who support Obamacare, legislation that would put 2.6 million Americans who make less than $30,000 a year at risk of either losing their jobs or having their wages shrink because hours are being cut. It's also the same people who support the war on coal, which is destroying thousands of very high-paying jobs, $75,000 a year jobs. I think the solution to this is to abandon the policies that have given us the Obama economy, that have given us a situation where median household income has been depressed by over $2,000. And then we need to look at real solutions like the RAISE Act, which would allow members of a union to get a merit-based raise. The working families of America get a working get a raise based on their merit and their performance instead of being trapped by a collective bargaining agreement.
Ms. Jensen, your response on minimum wage.
One of the biggest challenges to the economy of in our state is that no one has any money to spend. And by increasing the minimum wage, it is the quickest way to get money in the hands of our hardworking families. And if families are earning a little bit more money, they're going to spend money in our community. They might buy a new car or eat out a few more times a month or go to the mall a little bit more. And they're going to spend money here in our community. It's going to create more demand in our community, and it's going to create more jobs in our community. I absolutely think that raising the minimum wage is the first thing that we need to do to improve our economy. We have seen that it's the quickest way to save tax dollars. A report just came out last week from the Economic Policy Institute that by raising the minimum wage, we will save $7.6 billion in safety net programs in the first year and lift 900,000 people out of poverty. I think it's something that has to be done, and that's one of the first things I will address when I get to Congress.
Mr. Barr, you have a rebuttal?
Well, the better way to save taxpayer resources in terms of safety net programs is actual real growth. The problem with our economy today is that the administration's policies have resulted in 7 million more Americans in poverty today than there were when President Obama took office. Again, the solution is robust economic growth. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says that if we mandated an increase in the minimum wage for 3% of workers, which is what her idea is, then the result would be 500,000 to 1 million people losing their jobs, and 500 economists have said that this would be a job killer.
Ms. Jensen, rebuttal?
He's actually misquoting that report. Those people would not be losing their jobs, but could likely opt out of jobs that they were in so they could start small businesses, so they could be self-employed, so they could do other things because they'd previously kept those jobs just for their health care.
And now a question from Kyle Nicholas, who is the Eastern Kentucky University Student Government President. And Mr. Nicholas, you will direct your question first to Ms. Jensen.
Again, thank you for being here. Within our service region and campus community, about 46.7% of our students are on Pell Grants to continue their education. What will you do in Washington for the continuation and expansion of this program to further educate these Kentuckians?
We need to absolutely protect the total dollars that we allocate to Pell Grants. I actually would like to research possibly having a different rubric for how we allocate Pell Grants and allow more opportunities for students who are going into high demand careers or social service or some kind of career where they might not earn money to have a different qualification for how much Pell Grant money they receive. But I think there's a lot of opportunities that we can use. We need to protect the money that's there and look for opportunities to inspire young people to go into fields where the jobs are more likely and they can get the most benefit out of those Pell Grants.
Mr. Barr, your response to Kyle Nicholas's question.
Kyle, it's a great question, and to all of those EKU students who are here, it's a great question because affordability of college is a big issue for young people today. And one of the reasons why Pell Grants are getting squeezed in Washington is because of our massive debt, because of our runaway deficits. We're spending a little over $220 billion on unproductive debt service payments to our creditors like China. With modest increases in interest rates, that's going to be about $800 billion in the coming years. Reforming our mandatory spending programs, entitlement spending programs is critical. My opponent has said she would oppose those reforms. That's the greatest long-term threat to education because as mandatory spending grows, it's going to crowd out our ability to invest in our young people, to invest in Pell Grants, to invest in our education system. And I'll just add, we're also looking at solutions in Washington to keep interest rates low, and I've voted for and passed legislation that would keep interest rates low on student loans.
Ms. Jensen, your rebuttal?
Another point that is important about increasing the minimum wage, when we look at how much minimum wage has increased in the last 10 years and how much college tuition has increased in the last 10 years. College tuition has increased almost tenfold since the last time we increased the minimum wage. And we talk about young people working their way through college or working during college, and it is so far out of reach to a student can't even work for a summer anymore and pay for part of their college. Young people are taking out student loans to pay for textbooks. A textbook costs $700. You'd have to work for 3 weeks to pay for a textbook. In this day and age, it's important for our young people that we increase minimum wage. also.
Do you have a response?
Yes, any student that graduates from Eastern Kentucky University is a well-trained student, and they're going to make much more than the minimum wage because they got a quality education. We need to expand those opportunities for folks. Increasing the minimum wage, even if you're for it, this is a very modest and unimaginative proposal. What we need are more kids educated at fine institutions like UK and EKU and Midway College and Georgetown College and Kentucky State University in our district. That's what we need, and people coming out of those schools will get much higher paying jobs than minimum wage jobs. That's where our focus should be, not increasing the cost of hiring, which is going to put 500,000 people out of work instantaneously.
Next question is mine, and it will be directed to Mr. Barr. First, our nation's crumbling infrastructure is well documented. Many bridges are rated as obsolete. We know just to our north, the bridge that connects Kentucky to Ohio, the Brent Spence Bridge, will cost billions of dollars to replace, but we know it needs to be replaced, and soon. What is your commitment to dealing with and improving the country's roads and bridges?
Well, as I said before, I've been working on a number of bipartisan solutions. This is one of them. A colleague of mine, freshman colleague from Maryland, John Delaney, and I got to know each other when I first got to Congress. We started talking about how do we invest in infrastructure without adding to the debt or raising taxes on the American people. The American Society of Civil Engineers says that our infrastructure gets a D+ on their report card. We need to increase infrastructure investment. But what we say is let's allow companies that have earnings overseas to repatriate their profits that they earn overseas into the United States tax-free in exchange for investing in American infrastructure, investing in a bond, basically to finance infrastructure. This way we would increase, we could leverage up to $750 billion in infrastructure investment without raising taxes, without adding to the debt, and also dealing with a non-competitive tax code.
Ms. Jensen, dealing with America's infrastructure challenges.
It's not just America. Right here in Kentucky, there are over 3,000 bridges and overpasses which are structurally deficient. The bridge that goes between Lexington and Frankfort on 64 over the Kentucky River has 40,000 cars that go over it every day, and it's been structurally deficient for years. It is something that needs to be addressed, but my opponent's plan is basically a reverse Dutch auction that nobody understands and has no chance of ever getting passed. I would like to see a real opportunity for repatriation of offshore profits that actually makes sense and is fair. But with my opponent's plan, yes, the money doesn't come from taxpayers, but that tax revenue is not coming back to the country anyway, so it's like you're stealing Peter to pay Paul. The money is not, it's still coming from the same pot. It's less revenue that's coming to the United States to actually build that infrastructure. So I don't think that that plan would ever go anywhere, although I have to give him credit for looking into it and trying to come up with a solution. I believe that we need to, as Congress, address a real long-term fix to the transportation bill, not just a stopgap measure that's going to get us through the next couple months, which is typically how we address things in Congress and why Congress is not working. Nobody wants to deal with the hard stuff and make hard decisions and hard solutions.
Time. And now your response to Mr. Barr.
Well, maybe one of the reasons why things don't get done in Congress is because we have people who are running for office who are defeatist and not optimistic. I'm optimistic. I'm reaching across the aisle working with Democrats to find solutions. You know, one of the problems with Washington dysfunction and why you see conflict and things not happening is because the House of Representatives, in a bipartisan way, has passed over 387 bills. Not bills that are going nowhere, bills that I've voted for, bills I've co-sponsored, bills that I've actually introduced that are solutions, that are bipartisan, that are oriented towards job creation, that have passed the House with huge bipartisan majorities. Where are they? They're in the Senate. They're on Harry Reid's desk. The solution is to change the Senate.
Time. All right, Ms. Jensen, rebuttal.
First of all, I agree we should change the Senate. Let's get rid of McConnell and send Allison. But second of all, the majority of those bills he mentioned are just tax breaks and more opportunities to cut back on regulations. We do need people in Washington who can work together, who can come up with solutions and actually make a difference and do things, make legislation, create legislation that will actually get passed, that will help people, and not just legislation to write bills to say I'm writing legislation.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Sam Youngman of the Lexington Herald-Leader, and he'll direct that question to Elizabeth Jensen.
I'm so glad y'all mentioned the Senate race. I was wondering if y'all knew there was one of those happening. I wonder if you could tell me, I've seen you both at events for your party's nominee. I wonder if you could tell me, where do you disagree with the person that your party's nominated? Where do you disagree with Secretary Grimes, and where do you disagree with Senator McConnell?
Allison Grimes has a very different race to run than I do. I'm focused on the issues that are in my district. I very strongly support Kentucky Connect. I think it's important for our entire state, and I have not been afraid to stand up for that and to be vocal on that throughout the campaign. I support comprehensive immigration reform, and I don't think that that is something that is on Allison's agenda. But again, I'm really focused on things that will help us here in our district, and it's time we have people working together in Washington. It's time we stop obstruction and stop gridlock in both sides of Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Barr.
Not sure I heard the answer to that question, but as far as I'm concerned, obviously I've been very vocal about being for congressional term limits. This differentiates me not only from my opponent and others in the Democratic Party, but differentiates me in many respects from some of the folks in my own party. The reason why I think this would be important is because I think it's in keeping with the Founding Fathers' vision of a citizen legislature, where members of Congress are elected, they go to serve their communities, and then they come home. I think ending the cycle of careerism in Washington would change the mentality, and it would lend itself to solution-oriented legislators. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've been so successful in just my first term in terms of reaching across the aisle in the model of Henry Clay, the great compromiser, a predecessor to me in this office. And I think it's important, regardless of whether term limits passes or not, that we support reforms of Washington that holds government agencies that are not working accountable and make sure that the politicians and bureaucrats actually honor hardworking taxpayers and all of the resources that they take from you to invest in Washington.
Ms. Jensen, your rebuttal?
Term limits, I think, come up every 2 years or every 4 years or 6 years, depending on what office you run for. You have an opportunity every year. Voters have a chance to end a representative's term after every election cycle. But I do think term limits are something that could be positive in Washington. However, the bill my opponent referred to that he has introduced, his term limits bill, has zero chance of ever being enacted according to GovTracker. So he's spending a lot of time working on things in Washington and talking about things in Washington, which will never actually get done.
Mr. Barr, a response?
Well, again, I don't think that the people of Central and Eastern Kentucky sent me to Congress to be a pessimist. They sent me to Congress to be a reformer. And many of the most important reforms our country has ever seen were unpopular to begin with. The people tell me that they want me to be different than others in Washington, and that's obviously what I'm doing because I'm standing out.
All right, thank you. And our next question will come from Jonice Franklin with WKYT Radio, and she will direct that first to Mr. Barr.
Thank you. Speaking of reforms, Congressman, would you support a federal cap on the interest rates payday lenders charge?
Well, we already have caps on interest rates. It's state-based regulation, usury laws, and it's a state-by-state system right now. I'm not against federal consumer protection laws either, and I think that's legitimate. The problem that you see right now with some of the efforts in Washington to take away choices of financial products is that it would have the unintended consequence of driving a lot of Americans who live paycheck to paycheck into unregulated alternatives underground, loan sharks and the like. With some of these non-deposit payday short-term lenders, at least you have state regulation, at least you have federal consumer protection laws that protect consumers against usurious interest rates that are in place. I'm open to looking at how we can improve those consumer protection laws, but the last thing we want to do is put an unaccountable bureaucracy in place to regulate these legitimate law-abiding businesses out of business and forcing Americans who are struggling to meet ends meet because of this bad economy into alternatives that are unsafe and non-transparent for those people.
Ms. Jensen, your response.
I think my opponent's support of payday lenders is appalling. For payday lenders who charge 400 to 650% interest that keep our hardworking families and many servicemen, even the military is cracking down on payday lenders because they're taking advantage of our servicemen, is absolutely appalling. I believe that we absolutely need to set limits on interest rates, but I think that there also is a great opportunity. It's a piece of legislation that Elizabeth Warren is working on to allow our post offices to offer banking services for the unbanked. It's a huge problem in our country right now, the percentage of families who are unbanked, and it's our lowest income families who are making on average $25,000 a year who use these payday services, and they're spending up to 10% of their annual income just on interest. It is the people who can afford it the least who are being hurt the most, who are being taken advantage of, and the fact that my opponent stands up for these kind of people rather than people here in our state who need an opportunity, who need a leg up once in a while, I think is disgusting.
Time. Mr. Barr, your response?
Well, the best consumer protection is competition and choice. And what I heard from my opponent was to give the government a monopoly over financial services and to politicize the allocation of credit. The last thing we want is government bureaucrats who are running a post office, not the fault of the letter carriers or the postal workers, but a federal bureaucracy that has put the postal office in $50 billion in debt. That's how we got in trouble in the last financial crisis, by getting the government involved in lending. I think we certainly want to avoid a financial crisis that has been devastating for the working families of this country. I think a better solution is competition and choice, and that's the way to protect consumers.
Time. Ms. Jensen, your response.
There is still an opportunity for competition without charging 400 to 650% interest to the people who need it the most. And the deficit at the post office is because they're required to carry the benefits and the pension plans long into the future, much more than any other business that is out there today. Postal banking works in many other countries. There's an infrastructure that is there already. People in the community are comfortable with that opportunity, and they could offer those services at a much lower rate while still underwriting the risk and still making money.
You're watching a debate of the candidates for a 6th District Congress here in Central Kentucky, and we're live from the campus of Eastern Kentucky University at the EKU Center for the Arts this evening. We have a great panel of journalists and a student representative, as well as some students on stage with us tonight, and we continue with a question now from Kyle Nicholas, the EKU Student Government President. He'll direct his question first to candidate Jensen.
One of the goals here at Eastern Kentucky University is to educate citizens of our service region in order to bring economic vitality to southeastern Kentucky. What is a way that you plan to bring industry and valuable jobs to the Commonwealth in order to retain this newly educated workforce here in Kentucky?
For us to bring new high-tech industries, manufacturing jobs, technology, we need a strong infrastructure. We need a strong data infrastructure. We need a strong internet infrastructure. I think most high-tech manufacturing and bigger businesses need the opportunity to have an educated workforce, to have a workforce that can pass drug tests, which is a big challenge for new businesses coming here. And we need to have an infrastructure that can allow them to get their goods in and out of the wherever the manufacturing facility is, whether it's in Eastern Kentucky or in the eastern counties that are within our district. We need access, and we need a good, strong workforce, and we need opportunities, not for today, but we need to start thinking about things in the future. We need to start looking at new forms of an energy infrastructure so that as we transition into the future, we have an infrastructure that is going to employ people, but also be good for our economy.
Mr. Barr, your response.
Well, one of the first things we need to do to make sure that smart young students who are graduating from EKU have a job when they graduate, the first thing we need to do is get the government out of the way. One of the reasons why the job market, the labor market, has been so depressed is because we've overregulated all of the employing industries of our state. The coal industry is down. The energy sector is being suffocated through the war on coal. And it's not just coal, it's oil and natural gas. We can't even get the Keystone Pipeline built, which would create thousands of jobs and engineering jobs in this country, but for this administration, which is blocking a new energy renaissance in this country. Dodd-Frank matters for young entrepreneurs because it means that banks and lenders won't loan to those good, smart, young entrepreneurs with a good idea, maybe not a lot of track record, but could get a loan to a small business owner and an entrepreneur. Access to capital is an impediment in a lot of cases to young people. And we obviously need to stop bad policies like Obamacare, which is shrinking the workforce. But on a proactive level, we need to pass better job training bills. You know, I visited Hitachi, Okanite, Enersys, Novellus, and Quanex, manufacturers right here in Madison County. What they say to me is they need qualified, skilled labor, and they're not getting it from the federal government.
Ms. Jensen, your rebuttal.
My opponent believes that the only way to create jobs is through tax breaks for the wealthy and to roll back government regulations. But the reality is, when we invest in our infrastructure, when we increase minimum wage, and when we guarantee equal pay for equal work, we're going to have money to spend. People are going to be spending more money in our communities. It's going to create more demand, which is going to give our employers more confidence, and they're going to expand and create more jobs. Mr.
Barr, rebuttal?
This is just not true. Obamacare is a massive tax increase on the middle class, on the working Americans. $1 million increases in taxes is what the law that my opponent supports. That is it's $1 trillion. $1 trillion taken out of the private economy in this country. The truth is this, that if we promote economic growth, a strong economy, through vibrant entrepreneurship, through high-skilled, educated people coming out of EKU and UK and the engineering colleges, if we unleash manufacturers with low-cost energy and a competitive tax system, then we actually will get job creation that will help everyone in every income category.
Time. The next question comes from me, and I'll direct it first to Mr. Barr. The National Weather Service closed its office in the 1990s in Lexington under pressure from Congress for expense reasons. And it left the bluegrass to get its forecasts and its warnings and its watches out of Louisville. Some tornadoes have rolled through without warning. Would you support returning a Weather Service office to Central Kentucky?
Well, certainly, and I'd be very interested in looking at that if the meteorologists and the folks in the field say that this would actually improve notification to some of our folks who have, unfortunately, been hit by some of these tornadoes. You know, my constituents out in Menifee County were victims. We had 3 unfortunate deaths because of a tornado that hit Menifee and Morgan County a couple of years ago. I visited Paris, Bourbon County, just a few weeks ago to tour some of the damage up there. And fortunately, no one was seriously injured or killed, but we did have substantial property damage up there. I'd be interested to know, would that increase timely notification if we moved a National Weather Service location to Lexington? But remember, we always have to honor the hardworking taxpayers. If this is going to increase the burden on the taxpayers with no benefit in terms of advance notice on weather events, then I'm not sure it would be worth the investment.
Ms. Jensen.
Since that center was closed down about 4 years ago, we had very devastating tornadoes in eastern Kentucky, and I was there the morning after the tornado in West Liberty, and I was working with a Christian Appalachian Project delivering supplies, and I saw the devastation that was there. I know how hard it has been for those families, and I know that those families and those communities would not be back up and running again if it wasn't for federal disaster relief. My opponent voted against Hurricane Sandy relief, and I would like to know what would happen to our communities when they don't have the advance warning of weather, tornadoes, or other severe weather, and go through this devastation and have all of this disaster and don't have the support of our federal government to get back up on their feet. I think that we owe it to people throughout our community, throughout our district, to have access to the most updated information and technology to keep us safe.
Mr. Barr, your rebuttal.
Well, with respect to Hurricane Sandy, I did vote for relief. I did vote for targeted relief that actually would benefit the victims of the disaster. What I did not vote for was massive increases in bureaucracy in Washington, repairs to the Smithsonian, tax dollars going to things that did not immediately address the humanitarian crisis on the ground. So to correct the record, I am always in favor of supporting disaster relief. I think that's a core function of the government. But as we have seen, even in cases where FEMA relief is warranted or needed, we have seen the federal government waste taxpayer dollars.
Ms. Jensen, rebuttal.
My opponent's answer ultimately is it comes down to taxpayer dollars. And there are too many things that we don't have control of that we need to have an opportunity to respond to solve, to work together with our government and our community to find solutions. And his answer is always, it just depends on how much it costs. And there are many cases when that's important. I come from a business background. I'm fiscally responsible. But I know sometimes we have to be able to balance the risk and the danger and the outcome and figure out how much money it's worth investing.
Ms. Jensen, thank you. Our next question comes from Sam Youngman of the Lexington Herald-Leader, who, by the way, spent some years in Washington before he returned to Kentucky, and he's back home and enjoying this campaign, I guess. Sam, your question for candidate Jensen.
The United States and an international coalition are engaged in airstrikes against the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. Are there circumstances under which you would support the use of American ground troops? And if so, what would those circumstances look like?
The situation in the Middle East with ISIS and ISIL is very grave, and I think they do pose an imminent danger to the United States. I think we have set a goal of destroying ISIS, and when we have set a goal, putting limits on the tools and resources that we might use is not prudent. But I believe that we have other allies in the region. We need to have a coalition with other Arab nations, and they should be the ones to put boots on the ground first. They are closer in proximity. They have the resources, and they have a vested interest. But for us to build coalitions with countries overseas, we need to have coalitions at home. And when our Congress and our Senate and our President can't work together, how can we solve these issues overseas? We need to have a government here that works together so that we can address these issues when they come up overseas. And I actually lived from 1989 to the middle 90s. I managed the Middle East operations for an American company and had a lot of opportunity to work with families and countries and people living in the Middle East. And I think one of our challenges right now is that we don't have a deep understanding of the cultural differences between our country and between the countries in the Middle East, and it makes it harder and harder for us to solve and be proactive in long-term solutions.
Mr. Barr, your response to Sam's question.
Well, I can tell you what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff advised those of us in Congress who have been in these briefings on the threat. The threat is a clear and present danger to the national security of our country. But what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said was that the president's objective, while the objective is right to degrade and destroy ISIL wherever they exist, the strategy is insufficient. That's the president's own military commander who says that the president's strategy of airstrikes and supporting the Free Syrian Army is necessary but not sufficient. I supported the narrow request of the Commander-in-Chief in that instance, but I also joined colleagues in calling for the House Armed Services Committee to conduct very searching oversight and bringing in retired military commanders, veterans of Iraq, to testify in front of the American people in Congress to tell us what is required to achieve victory. And I think we should follow the advice of those commanders with experience. Now, with respect to coalition building, and I think that's important, and we should follow the model of George H. Walker Bush in building a coalition. But you don't build a coalition by not doing what you say. And that's the problem with this commander-in-chief. And it's also a problem that he's not prepared to do what he's asking other countries to do.
Rebuttal from Ms. Jensen.
If we truly want to be a world leader and not just the world's police force, we really need to make an effort to understand the culture of Islam and what motivates and inspires these groups, both the moderates and the extremists. And we need to have a forward-thinking plan that just doesn't include our senior military officials, but it engages leaders from all across the world, and not just in a room when we're under crisis, but develop a long-term diplomacy and educational plan at a grassroots level so we have a real understanding of how we don't have to just play whack-a-mole. We can have a long-term plan so that we have a strategy and don't have to deal with issues like this every 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years.
Mr. Barr, your rebuttal.
American foreign policy is in crisis because, unfortunately, we don't have a foreign policy. Our foreign policy in this country is about apologizing to the world for America. It's about weakening America through declining capabilities with a rising threat of Islamic terrorism. It's about abandoning allies like Ukraine when they actually need us. You know, President Poroshenko was in the Congress, in the chamber, giving an address, and they are desperate for American strength, American resolve, and they're not finding it in the commander-in-chief. I've met with the ambassador from Romania, the ambassador from Lithuania. They're asking where America is, and abandoning our allies is not a way to build a coalition.
You're watching the 6th District Congressional Debate, and we are live from the EKU Center this evening, just 8 days before the election, as the folks will be going to the polls and taking the only poll that really counts coming up a week from tomorrow. Our next question is from Jonice Franklin with WKYT Radio, and she will first direct her question to Mr. Barr.
Thank you. Congressman, if you are reelected on November 4th, what will be your top priority going forward?
Well, job creation. And we've been laser focused on that and been working on that for the last 22 months. Regrettably, a lot of the bills that we have passed the House, and they have passed the House with bipartisan support, even though my opponent says they have no chance. They are sitting on Harry Reid's desk. They are waiting for leadership in the Senate to send those bills on that would instantly create thousands of jobs, hundreds of thousands of jobs. Bills like the RAINS Act, bills like the Coal Jobs Protection Act, bills like Restoring Proven Financing for American Employers Act, a bill that I passed with bipartisan support, which would restore access to credit for mid-sized and emerging growth companies, bills that would make permanent certain aspects of the tax code which produce job creation and that are important for manufacturing. These are bills that are gathering dust over there. We will pass them again, RAINS Act. These are bills that need to go to the president's desk. That's what we need to be focused on in the next term.
Ms. Jensen, your response.
Those bills that my opponent is referring to that are sitting, waiting in the Senate are primarily tax breaks and bills that would roll back restrictions and regulations on businesses. The reality is the wealthy who are getting these tax breaks, who are getting more opportunity to not honor workers' needs, are companies who are getting wealthier, and they're getting wealthier. The reality is they are not creating jobs. When we can pass a minimum wage, when we can invest in our infrastructure, when we can have equal pay for equal work, we will be creating more jobs. And my opponent's key piece of legislation will roll back a lot of the restrictions from 2008, which is how we ended up in the financial crisis, which is how Kentucky families lost their homes and their life savings. We don't need to go back there again. The Consumer Financial Safe Products Bureau was set up to protect consumers, to allow businesses to expand with reasonable regulations without putting themselves at risk and their families and their businesses at risk.
Mr. Barr, your rebuttal?
Well, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that my opponent is referring to is a bureaucracy in Washington that is the least accountable agency in the entire federal government. That sole purpose, it seems to be, is to harass job creators and to take away choices, financial services and products away from the American people. If you talk to small businesses in this district, auto dealers, for example, that sell automobiles to our constituents here in this district, they are getting harassed by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. College students here at EKU should be very concerned about an unaccountable bureaucracy in Washington that is able to look at your credit card bill without you even knowing and without your consent. That is the Bureau. That is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that my opponent supports.
Ms. Jensen, your response or rebuttal?
This is where we continue to differ so frequently. My opponent is always going to be on the sides of the banks, on the sides of big business, on the sides of companies. I will always be on the side of the consumer. I will always be on the side of the workers in our community. I will always be on the side of our families and our small businesses who are trying to make a living right here in our district.
Thank you. And now a question from Kyle Nicholas, who is the EKU Student Government President and with us tonight, and he will direct his question first to candidate Elizabeth Jensen.
Which do you see as more important, federal spending for social services or federal spending that's used to open up more opportunities for adult and non-traditional secondary or education opportunities?
I think there needs to be a balance. It's not one size fits all. College is very important, and the last 12 years I've run a foundation to help young people go to college and prepare people to go to college, and I would like to see every young person that wants to go to college, that has the aptitude to go to college, to make sure they have the resources and they're prepared to go to college and to succeed and to move on. But I think we also owe it to a lot of young people who might not be on the college path to give them other opportunities, particularly in the rural areas in this district. I've talked to so many families and people who college is just not on their radar. They're not comfortable taking on that much debt, or they're just not planning to go that way, and we need to make sure that there are some opportunities for young people who might not be on that path, whether it's technical training or manufacturing training or just basic finance and job skills, so that they can go into the biggest growing fields in our country right now are service industries and hospitality, and those don't require a college degree. Those jobs are out there and they're available, and we need to make sure that we're giving opportunities to a broad group of young people. It's just not one size fits all.
Mr. Barr, your response to Kyle's question. question.
Kyle, the director of the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, who worked for President Bill Clinton, Doug Elmendorf, says that Obamacare is a disincentive to work. This is a massive government takeover of 1/6 of the American economy. There are 47 million Americans who are now on food stamps as a result of the bad policies of this administration. 13 million more Americans dependent on the government. I can tell you that my constituents want a job. The best anti-poverty policy ever invented is a good-paying job, not another government program. So what do we have to do? We've actually got to produce policies that get people back to work, that incentivize work, that reward work. That's the agenda that the House majority has been working on. It's not just Republicans. Democrats have joined us. Again, bipartisan bills sitting in the Senate. We need action, we need leadership, we need jobs, and we're not getting it from Harry Reid, Barack Obama, and Nancy Pelosi.
Ms. Jensen, a rebuttal?
I think it's interesting how the Affordable Care Act and Kentucky Connect becomes the answer to just about every single question. But I do believe that we need to look for opportunities where universities can work with businesses to come up with programs and technical careers and training for the jobs that are going to be out there in the future. We need better communication between our colleges and universities in developing their programs along with businesses so that they understand the needs of not 10 years from now, but 20 years from now and 30 years from now.
Mr. Barr, rebuttal?
Well, in addition to a robust free enterprise economy that's dynamic, growing, and that is job creating, we also need to fix some of our broken job training programs. And I've done that. I've worked in a bipartisan way, a bill that actually passed the Congress and was signed into law in the President in my first term called the Workforce Opportunity and Investment Act. This streamlines wasteful, bureaucratic, and duplicative job training programs, narrows it down, and focuses federal job training programs on the labor market so that people who receive training are getting trained for the jobs of the 21st century and that match the needs of the workplace.
I'll have the next question directed first to Mr. Barr. We are live in Madison County this evening, and we're not far away from the Bluegrass Army Depot, where right now the chemical weapons that have been there for decades are now being destroyed. Do you think it's important that there be an ongoing mission at that depot to sustain the jobs that are here in Richmond and Madison County and that are commuted to from across this district after the chemical weapons are gone?
Well, in my first term in Congress, we've been really focused on making sure that the Bluegrass Army Depot is a viable and continuing operating facility. We've worked successfully with the Army to get a waiver for the Bluegrass Army Depot firefighters, and we secured that waiver from the furlough there for public safety reasons for not just the depot, but the Madison County area. It's a big, important achievement for the citizens here for public safety. We've also voted in favor of continuing the demilitarization process, which remains on track because of the work that we have done in Congress to continue those appropriations with the leadership of Senator McConnell and Appropriations Chairman Hal Rogers, and I've worked with them on that to secure that. In addition, I have worked and will continue to work on a layoff aversion study so that we've done phase one, we need phase two, that's the next step in the process. We're going to have a lot of skilled workers out there, and when the demilitarization process is completed in the early 2020s, we have great opportunity to attract industry, and we've got a great skilled workforce here in Madison County that we can populate new industry.
Ms. Jensen, your response.
I think this is actually somewhere where the congressman and I actually agree. It is a very important employer. It's a very good economic driver for Madison County and for this region. I think as the jobs that are there now roll out over the next decade, it's important that we look for opportunities to bring new manufacturing, new technology, new infrastructure here to provide jobs for those employees as the weapon deconstruction plays out over the next few years. I think it's an opportunity, again, to build infrastructure all across the district. There are opportunities to build bridges and roads and bring better manufacturers here with high-skilled needs that we can utilize the workers that are here.
Mr. Barr, rebuttal?
Well, like I said, you're going to have up to 1,000 or more high-quality, high-skilled jobs that will be going away just because the demilitarization process ends. So it is critically important that we have the foresight now a number of years in advance to start looking at the type of skills that those workers will have. We don't want to lose that intellectual talent and those skills here, because those are good paying jobs, important for the tax base here in Madison County. Once the demilitarization process is completed, we have a great opportunity to attract business. That's why I'm supportive of the layoff aversion program, and I'm working with all the stakeholders to make that happen so that we have the infrastructure in place, and we're going after those kinds of businesses where we can retain that talent.
Ms. Jensen, rebuttal.
It's a great opportunity that we need to make sure that we are attracting businesses here and manufacture or some kind of technology to use that high-skilled labor force.
Sam Youngman from the Lexington Herald-Leader with a question. I'll direct this to Ms. Jensen.
Polling and elections have shown us repeatedly that the president is not very popular here in Kentucky. If you were filling out his report card, what letter grade would you give the president?
B-.
Can you tell us why?
As with most of you that are here tonight, there are a lot of things that he has done that I absolutely do not agree with, whether it's the war on coal and the EPA regulations, his position on guns, the Keystone Pipeline. There are a lot of things that we don't agree on, but he has been very good for our economy. I support the Affordable Care Act and Kentucky Connect because it's helped our state thanks to our governor's cooperation. We have a plan here with over 500,000 people who are enrolled in healthcare. We're going to have a healthier workforce that's going to be more productive. It's going to create more jobs in the healthcare industry, and it's a win-win for everyone in our state. And I'm glad that thanks to starting this process with the president, we have healthcare. We've stepped forward on something, and it's a good thing, and I'm proud to stand up for that. There are other things that seem to be harder and harder every day. I'm disappointed with the selection of the new Ebola czar. I think that we should have had someone there who has a medical experience and can handle medical issues. But
Mr.
I'm
Barr.
not afraid to be a Democrat.
Thank you. Mr. Barr, agreed for the president.
Well, I would give the president, unfortunately, a failing grade. That probably doesn't surprise a lot of people. But I want the president to succeed just like I would want any president to succeed. I've worked with the president where I can. I'm willing to do that. I've worked with him on the war on terror and supporting his request. I supported the VA reform package that the president fortunately signed. I worked to pass the Farm Bill, voted multiple times on behalf of the Kentucky farming families and the Kentucky Farm Bureau to get a Farm Bill passed. The president fortunately signed that into law. The bipartisan budget agreement I voted for, the president signed that into law. Unfortunately, the president is more of an impediment on the big solutions, like reforming our mandatory spending problem, like jump-starting our economy. And we do need leadership in this country. Now that we have all of these external threats, all of these external challenges, I am ready to work with the president. I meet with the legislative liaison in the White House, and I'm willing and ready to work with the president in a bipartisan way. But instead of dividing the country, we need leadership that unites the country. And we need leadership that is going to focus on job creation. And unfortunately, a lot of the policies coming out of the regulatory administration are killing jobs.
Ms. Jensen, your rebuttal?
The president is one person, and all of our dysfunction is across the board in Washington. We have a Senate, a Congress, and a president who cannot work together to overcome any of the challenges that we have here, whether it's the Veterans Hospital or immigration reform that ended us with a horrible border crisis this summer, or Ebola. When we don't have a government that work together, and it's all three parties of our government, we can't move our country forward on any level, and it's as much the fault of the Congress and the Senate and the President. It's time for us to find ways to work together and not to blame one faction of the government over the other.
Mr. Barr, your rebuttal.
Well, the No Labels Foundation, which is a nonpartisan group that encourages problem solving, has designated me one of few members of Congress that they call a problem solver. Why? Because I've worked in a bipartisan way to try to get things done, to stop fighting and start fixing problems, whether it's working with Democrat Carolyn Maloney of New York, or Democrat Ami Bera of California, or Democrat John Delaney of Maryland, or working with the Democrat Ruben Hinojosa of Texas. I am reaching across the aisle. We're trying to deliver solutions. And many of them have passed the House, notwithstanding the claims of my opponent. They have passed the House. But we need leadership in the Senate, and we need a president who is willing to work with us just as much as I'm willing to work with him.
All right, thank you. Well, that's the time we have for our questions tonight, and there have been some very good ones from our panel and some very intriguing answers for you to ponder over the next few days before the election. And it's time now for our closing remarks from our candidates, and we will have a 90-second closing remark from Elizabeth Jensen.
On November 4th, you have a very important choice to make, and these are the big differences between me and my opponent. I'm a Kentucky mom and a business executive who knows how to create jobs because I've done it, and a founder of a nonprofit organization that promotes education. Unlike Andy Barr, I will never side with predatory lenders who charge 400 to 650% interest that keep our hardworking families and our servicemen in a cycle of debt. If you elect me, I will go to work day one to increase the minimum wage and to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act. We need this for our families here in our district. My opponent opposes both of these. Unlike Congressman Barr, I certainly won't be spending your tax dollars on perks for myself. No hundreds of thousands of dollars on campaign-style mailers to make myself look good, or perks for other members of Congress. Andy Barr voted for these perks, and he spent more than $211,000 of your taxpayer money on campaign-style communications. As someone who's worked my entire career with people from all backgrounds, I know how to get things done. You have to sit down at the table, work out your differences, and try and come up with solutions. My campaign has received support from real people in this district from both sides of the aisle. I won't risk the full faith and credit of our country on a shutdown. My opponent voted for the government shutdown, and when Congress came together with bipartisan legislation to reopen the government, my opponent said no. And he sat next to me in Frankfurt a couple weeks ago and said he has no regrets. My only special interest will be you and your families.
That's our time. And now a closing statement from Andy Barr.
Well, again, thank you to EKU, WKYT, the Herald Leader, and Kyle, to the student body here and WEKU for the opportunity to discuss the future of our country. And it has been a true privilege and honor to represent the people of Central and Eastern Kentucky, the hardworking people of this district in Congress. And I look forward to continuing to work for solutions for the people. The bottom line is this country has always been a country built on the American dream, the idea that we pass on a better future for our kids and grandkids. And unfortunately, because of the policies in Washington, because of unaccountable government, because of failed policies and the war on coal, and unfortunately, healthcare reform that hasn't worked but raised costs and taken away jobs from people, and because of financial regulation that is taking away choices from people and stifling access to credit, because of all of this and because of the rise of terrorism, the American people and my constituents are telling me they feel like the American dream is slipping away. We can do better than this. This is not about perks. I am doing this for a cause, not a career. I spend less money, but I communicate more with my constituents. Another government program, raising the minimum wage, new regulations, more government spending, more debt. If that worked, we would be in a boom right now. We don't need more of the failed policies. We need a new approach. We don't need to grow Washington's economy. We don't need to send your tax dollars to Washington to grow Washington. We need to grow your economy, the economy of your pocketbook. That's what I'm fighting for. I'm not fighting for Washington. I'm fighting for you, and I'd appreciate the opportunity for another 2 years to continue our important work.
Mr. Barr, thank you, and thank you, candidates. And a reminder, the election is a week from tomorrow. We thank our partners, Eastern Kentucky University, the Lexington Herald Leader, and WEKU Radio. From all of us at WKYT, good night from EKU.